In this video, I'm going to talk about proper practices in sketches. But before I begin, I want to discuss the concept of constraints. Constraints are all the definitions that we provide to the software to fully define a sketch, part, or assembly. We can divide constraints into two categories. Ground constraints tell the software where the object is located, and geometric constraints tell the software how the object is shaped. Now let's get started with the sketch. I can start my sketch if I click anywhere in space, but I want to make sure that I'm selecting my starting point with purpose. The starting point may define the location of the object, so I want to make sure that I'm providing a proper definition or relationship between the starting point and other features within this coordinate system. It is important for me to take a moment to think about my part, my design, and my coordinate system. You don't have to put your starting point on the origin, but wherever I put it, it should be logical for my design. So maybe I want my starting point to be on this horizontal axis, or maybe I want it off the axis. Wherever I put it is fine, as long as it makes logical sense for my design. The placement of your part with respect to the given planes and origin does matter, and you should think this through. So I'm going to start up here and click on my first point. As I move around, Creo is going to provide some suggestions. If it thinks I'm trying to make a horizontal line, it will suggest a horizontal line, and the same for vertical. These are examples of geometric constraints. If I opt into these, Creo will keep this line horizontal no matter how else I modify the part, and it will prevent me from changing it unless I go in and remove that constraint. So let me show you how that works. If I click and drag this, I can make the line shorter, longer, and move it up and down, but no matter what I do, it will stay horizontal. If this was a mistake, I can find this horizontal constraint in this little circle here and click on it and hit delete on my keyboard, and then I can modify this line without that constraint. So maybe I want that line to be at an angle. And as I draw the rest of my shape, you can see that it gives me the option to align my endpoints, create lines that are parallel and perpendicular, create lines that are of equal length. So let me find that again. You can see this equal sign at the bottom, and the line at the top is highlighted in green. That means Creo is suggesting that my line that I'm creating now and that highlighted green line be equal in length. It can also make suggestions that I intersect with this plane or this plane. You always want to be mindful of if you accept or reject these suggested constraints. They can always be modified, but sometimes I like to purposefully make my initial sketch a little more dramatic than it actually is, so I don't accidentally accept a constraint that I didn't want. And I can always add constraints in after, which I will show you later. Right now, I'm going to finish my sketch and ignore all of these constraints. As I continue with my shape, maybe I made a line that I don't want to be a line. Maybe I want this to be an arc instead. I can click my delete segment tool, and I can either click on that line, or I can click and drag through the line and it will delete it. I can then go back in and make an arc. And then maybe I want to add some circles as well. Now that I'm done, I want to properly define my object by putting in dimensions and constraints. Now I'm going to hit escape or hit the middle mouse button to say that I'm done with this tool and all of my dimensions are going to show up. Before we move on, take a minute and read these numbers. Over here I have a radius of 137. This distance is 115. Now remember, I'm in inches, and maybe this part isn't 115 inches. I want to make this part smaller, but I don't want to change the overall shape or appearance. If I change one of these numbers, it will keep the scale of my sketch proportional to what I originally made, but modify the dimensions. So maybe I want this to be 12 inches. If for whatever reason this is not working, what I want to do is select my entire sketch. And as I release the mouse button, I can see this icon here, which is also shown up here. It is the modify tool. In the window that shows up, I can see all my dimensions. When I click on them, they are highlighted in the graphics window so I can find it. I can modify these dimensions individually, but if I select lock scale and I change this number and hit OK, The dimensions will change, but the proportion will stay the same. Now what I want to do is constrain and dimension my part. Up here is where you can see the constraints. If I hover over one, it will tell me what it's called and what it is used for. So this is the vertical constraint. Maybe I want to make this line vertical, so I select my vertical constraint and then I can click on this line. I can also do this by clicking these 2 points. I can use the horizontal feature to make these lines horizontal, or what I can do is I can make them perpendicular to the vertical line. I can also make them parallel to each other. Maybe I want this arc to be tangent to these 2 lines, so I can use my tangent feature on the top and the bottom. If I want these 2 circles to be symmetric about this axis, I can use the symmetry feature and select the 2 centers and then select the central axis. If I want my 2 circles to be equal, I can always put an equal number for both dimensions, but we want to keep our designs as robust as possible and make editing simple, so try and take advantage of constraints when possible. I'm going to use my equal constraint to make these 2 circles equal. Lastly, I want this point to be on my horizontal axis, so I'm going to hit the coincident button and hit my point and my axis. Now that my part is constrained, I'm ready to dimension. You can see that there's 2 colors for my dimensions. Some are light blue and some are black. Light blue dimensions are the dimensions that Creo suggests. If I hover over them, it will tell me that it is a weak dimension. We always want a fully defined sketch, so we want all of our dimensions to be in black, meaning that they're strong. I can make a dimension strong by typing in a value for it. I can also make a dimension strong by clicking on it and hitting this button here, which turns the suggested number into a strong dimension. To add dimensions, I can click on this dimension button up top and either select the line and middle click, or I can select the 2 points and middle click. Now I want to show you a couple of things. This suggested dimension is 8.32. It is between this axis and the center of this circle, but maybe I don't want to include that dimension. Maybe I would rather include the distance from the center of the circle to this right line. So I have dimension selected. I'm going to click the center of the circle and the line on the right and middle click. And maybe that's 12. When I put that in, you can see that that 8 disappeared because I put a strong dimension here, and that location of the circle along the horizontal is defined. If I tried to add that back in, I would have this window pop up telling me that my sketch is overdefined. Because I have this distance here and this distance here, this one here is already defined, it is already existing, and if I add it, it will be overdefined. So it gives me the option to delete the one I'm creating or delete a different one that I made. So maybe I actually want this 8.34 and I don't want this 12, so I'm going to delete that and it will leave my 8.34 where I want it. The last thing I want to show you is this diameter feature. If I say this is 7 inches in diameter, but I would rather it show radius instead of diameter, what I can do is click on it once, and this little window will pop up, and I can click on this, and it will show radius instead of diameter. So these are the tools that you can use to fully constrain and dimension your sketch. Remember that you always want your sketch to be fully defined, and to use constraints as much as possible to avoid repetitive dimensions.